everyone, and welcome to the Royal Academy here in the heart of London. My name is Hannah Higham and I am the Senior Curator of Collections here, and it's been a pleasure to be working with Viking in the last few years, who support kindly our collections gallery and the important work of our collections team. It's a very special moment for us because we have with us the most iconic Flaming June, which is on loan to us until January 2025 from the Museo de Arte de Ponce in Puerto Rico. Today I am very, very pleased to be sat in front of Flaming June, a painting by Frederic Lord Leighton, who was President of the Royal Academy for 18 years. And this work, perhaps his most well-known, if not perhaps the most well-known Victorian painting of all. And I am looking across to my very kind colleague who has come all the way from New York, Patrick Monahan. So Patrick, I know you've written extensively about Flaming June, not least for Vanity Fair amongst other magazines, and I wonder, what was it that first sort of captured your attention? When did you first see the painting?
Oh, well, for me, I feel a very strong personal connection to this painting. It has sort of followed me around in my life for the last 10 years or more. My engagement with the painting started when the painting was on loan to the Frick collection in New York. And I was walking down Fifth Avenue and I saw all of these banners, these absolutely eye-catching banners of the painting with its orange, beautiful color. And I looked it up quickly and realized that this British masterpiece is in a museum in Puerto Rico. And I called up my editor at Vanity Fair immediately and I said, we have to write about this. So I wrote an article, as it often happens, without seeing the painting in person. And I went to the Frick collection, to its press preview, and all of these writers were quite taken with the painting up front in this enormous room, and I had done my work already, and I hung back, and I waited until they dispersed. And then I stood in front of the painting, and I said out loud to the universe, isn't this the most wonderful painting in the world? And this woman, who was a stranger, said to me, yes, it is wonderful. And did you read the wonderful article that came out in Vanity Fair about the painting? And I said, I have to confess, I wrote the wonderful article. And this wonderful lady said, then I have to confess, my grandfather bought this wonderful painting. And that was Maria Luisa Ferre, who's the head of our Board of Trustees at the Museo de Arte de Ponce. And I just said, what are you doing for lunch? We had lunch, and that lunch has changed my life over the last 10 years, as I've spent writing about the painting, following the painting around the world, and loving it as many other people do, fortunately.
So, what a wonderful kind of moment and coincidence to start your Flaming June journey.
Well, the amazing thing is, I'm so glad you used that word coincidence, because the only thing that Lord Leighton ever said about this painting to explain it was that it was based on the chance attitude of a weary model at the end of a long day's work. And that word, chance, sort of haunted me for a long time, because the history of Flaming June is a chain of chances, which transformed a painting into a forgotten piece of Victoriana in the middle of the century, and today, in the 21st century, into the masterpiece it's deserved to be. I also think about the transformation of the woman, meaning the model for this painting, into the icon that Flaming June has become. We know the identity of the model, and her name was Dorothy Dean. Leighton used various models for different parts of the body. There was a tradition in Victorian art to model for the head, to model for the body, and so forth. Dorothy Dean at least modeled for the head, and probably for all of it. Dorothy Dean was a model with which Leighton had a long association. They met in 1879, the year that Leighton became president of the Royal Academy. And she became his primary model and muse, if you like, for the last decades of his life. I mean, she not only posed for him, but he felt a personal responsibility for her. He launched her, or he tried to launch her, as an actress and as a celebrity in Victorian London. The irony is, it never really worked out for her as an actress, but she achieved her fame in a most unexpected way, many decades, a century later.
I wonder if you can say what it is that you feel is lodges this work in people's minds.
Well, for me, Hannah, what makes Flaming June absolutely irresistible, not just to me, but I think in the public imagination, is that Flaming June is a painting which reveals everything and explains nothing. In that way, she has quite a lot in common with other masterpieces in art history, and particularly portraits of women in art history. I think of the Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci, Vermeer's Girl with the Pearl Earring. These are paintings that we keep looking at and keep wondering about because we know about them, but we don't really know about them. With Flaming June, you have this woman who is having the most delicious summertime slumber by a sun-drenched sea behind her. And Leighton has calibrated the composition to draw us in and to tell us just enough. For instance, above the painting, you have this beautiful, blindingly white sea behind her, which Leighton has painted with thick brush strokes, which are known as impasto in art history. And they are just full of energy, and you can feel that blinding white heat behind her, contrasted with this very soft and even glow which surrounds the figure. The woman is sleeping under an awning which is shielding her from this heat, and yet her body is radiating it. Leighton, as an artist, has created basically a composition of a circle within a square, something absolutely simple, but something, again, irresistible. Your eye circles around this figure over and over as a spiral, going from lighter, cooler tones, which are crimson, and then slowly becoming ochre and amber and auburn, until you finally get to the center of a painting, which is this bright, blinding apricot color, this glowing apricot color. And your eye circles around all of these elements over her long leg, over her shoulder, the top of her head, over her other shoulder, spiraling closer and closer to the center of the picture, till you finally get to the center, and it's nothing but a closed eye, which again tells you nothing about who she is, why she's there, what she's dreaming about. You know nothing, and yet you know everything.
Yeah, the composition's really interesting, isn't it? Because the limbs almost act like kind of spokes on a wheel, or rays of sun that emit from the middle. Yeah. And for me, it's kind of, it was particularly great to bring this painting to the Royal Academy and be able to show it opposite our Tondo by Michelangelo, who had been such a kind of influence on Leighton. Leighton was a huge admirer since his very early days of studying in Florence and so on. But also that sense of the circular composition that that Michelangelo is the circle, the square, and even the sort of sense of her being like a sculptural relief. The way that that foot sort of pokes out from the middle of the composition, just sort of puncture that sort of surface, and she leans back into that, as you say, that really sort of delicious sort of scene, the sea behind. You're almost following her into her sort of slumber. It's really wonderful. But I wonder about those lessons from
well, for sure, and especially since Leighton had a cast of Michelangelo's Tondo in his studio when he painted Flaming June. That plaster cast, of which this is the original, was always literally in eyesight for Leighton when he was conceiving this picture. So it's quite extraordinary to have those two together in the same room, I think for the first time in history.
I think so, and I think, this will be the only place that will ever happen. So it's quite a moment for us at the Royal Academy. And for me to think about this display in terms of the sort of the sculptural qualities of Leighton and why they may exist. So we have sketch models that he made as he was sort of moving towards kind of painted compositions, and how he compiles these scenes really with these models before he commits them to paper and to canvas. But also that Flaming June herself appears as a tiny, tiny little sculptural relief in another painting of a sleeping woman called Summer Slumber.
Yes.
So this is a real continuation of a thought about sleep, about summer, about those sort of far off places, but perhaps also maybe with something slightly ominous about it. I wonder if you could say something about those oleander flowers that just take our eye over to the corner.
I always call this painting non-specific specificity. Because, as I said, you know everything about what's going on, but the only hint of what's actually going on is the oleander flower, which is dangling over the woman on the upper right corner of the canvas. And oleanders have a long story in art history, but basically the flower is known to be poisonous. So suddenly you have a woman and an oleander flower next to each other, and you wonder, is the woman sleeping? Is she in fact dead? Or is she perhaps a femme fatale? All of these questions are literally circling around this pinwheel composition. The other fact, or rather the other explanation for this, which I find even more convincing than any of these, is that in Leighton's letters at the time, he would compare the scent of oleander flowers to that of apricots. And so suddenly you have a whole synesthesia, in other words, smelling a color, that gives this totally immersive feeling to the painting. He wants you to feel the heat on your own body. He wants you to squint at that light. He wants you even to smell what that wonderful afternoon would be like. So I think the oleander flower has more to do with that. And at the same time, I can just add that Leighton was the exponent of a school of art called aestheticism, whose maxim was art for art's sake. In other words, a painting can have no greater meaning than itself. And I think the oleander is sort of the center of all of that, because it's saying you just can dive into this painting with all of your senses. You don't need to know art history. You could just love what this is offering.
Yes, it doesn't matter whether you registered the sort of Michelangelo influence in this at all. It is just, as you say, that incredibly compact composition, that dynamism, but also that delicious, I keep repeating that word that you said because it's so appropriate here. It's a sort of very sensuous painting in all sort of senses of that word.
And I think that's another reason why this painting is so famous, because it is so accessible. And everyone, hopefully everyone, knows that wonderful feeling of being in a faraway place, maybe taking a trip, maybe not, and just feeling the wonderful summer sunshine on your body.
And it's true that, you know, it's difficult to sort of decipher a very specific place because Leighton's kind of got this, as you say, kind of almost classical Greek balustrade behind. It looks sort of vaguely Mediterranean, but Leighton was a big traveller, and so he is possibly sort of compiling this from his many, many travels which he took to North Africa, to Greece, to Italy, Egypt, even Algeria, I think, as well. He was, you know, he was the president at this time of the Royal Academy and had been for 18 years, and an extremely sort of dynamic, innovative president where he was sort of reforming the schools, and he was kind of introducing new types of exhibition to the Royal Academy, and you know, really taking on quite a heavy administrative burden, and yet still managed to make time every year for those travels to these far-off places, to really absorb the cultures of other you know, cities and artistic styles as well.
Yes, I mean, there are oil sketches that survive of Leighton's travels, particularly in Greece. And I think the island, which is in the background of this painting, relates to his visits to Rhodes, I believe. Much earlier than this painting, 20 years earlier than this painting was created. The funny part is that there's an island off the coast of Ponce in Puerto Rico called Caja de Muerto, the dead man's coffin, which looks a lot like the painting, like the island in the back of this painting. So I always am happy to think that it has found, Flaming June has found the home that it deserves and it always wanted.
Yeah, and I know that people are always asking me, as we've sort of had this display open now, how did it end up in Puerto Rico?
The other part that makes this painting so iconic in a way. Paintings have stories inside themselves and they have stories around themselves. And sometimes the story around the painting is as exciting as the story inside it. With Flaming June, she has been, and I keep saying she because I do think of her as a person rather than as a painting.
I do the same.
And I think that's also a lot to do with her popularity. People go on journeys all the time, but sometimes we forget that paintings also go on extraordinary journeys. Flaming June was painted in London in 1895, and to put it in context, my favorite fact about it is that the same year that Lord Leighton painted Flaming June was the first year that Cézanne had his first solo exhibition at Ambroise Volar's gallery in Paris. So at the same time as this icon, if you like, of Victorian painting was created, modernism was already thrusting forward into the 20th century. And the flip side of that is, just as this painting was being created, it was already out of fashion. And you could talk about the fall and rise, or the rise and fall of Flaming June. Soon after she was created and exhibited at the Royal Academy, Leighton died. And he was buried from, well, his coffin was laid out in state at the Royal Academy.
Yeah.
And at the same time, Flaming June was being shown by one of her early owners, who was a man called William Lewson Thomas, who was the editor of a artistic, dramatic magazine in London. And he used Flaming June as a reproductive tool for his magazine. In fact, he printed it just as Leighton was dying and Victorian art was dying. Flaming June was being used as this image which could be used for popular consumption. Instead of being this rarefied object which was created by a president of the Royal Academy for a very limited, very elite group, suddenly Flaming June was being disseminated in a rather crude reproduction for a few shillings. And that, the story of Flaming June and how she became so popular is a two-waved current. On the one hand, Flaming June slowly was being reproduced and disseminated, but on the other hand, she was being kind of undermined as the 20th century and its modernism took over. I mean, they're great stories. I'll tell you one or two, shall I?
Go on.
About what happened to Flaming June in the 20th century. After the owner of the magazine, which was called The Graphic, had her and put her on these rather inexpensive reproductions, she changed hands again and was exhibited at the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. And the story goes that there was a young guard who was working at the Ashmolean and who noticed a pigeon stuck behind Lord Leighton's canvas. And he got very nervous and ran to the keeper at the time and he said, "Sir, there's a bird stuck behind Flaming June." And the keeper said, "Is it dead?" And the boy ran back to check. And he went back and he said, "Yes, sir, it's dead." And the keeper said, "Well, if the bird is dead, then it doesn't matter." And that, to me, shows in what low esteem Flaming June was held. In fact, the story of Flaming June gets even grimmer as the mid-20th century happened. Sometime in the 30s in London, she disappeared completely. Until in 1964, I believe, she was unearthed by an Irish builder in Clapham, who says that he discovered her hidden behind a panel above a fireplace in a house which he was demolishing, and took the painting out as a piece of sort of unwanted bric-a-brac from the house. He brought the painting to the nearest art-like establishment in Clapham, which was a frame shop, and sold the painting for £60 to the framer. The framer succeeded in selling the frame for £10, but not the painting. So he put the painting, the naked canvas, so to speak, in the window of his shop, where the story gets even more unbelievable. And Andrew Lloyd Webber tells the story of walking down Battersea Rise, Clapham, and seeing this painting in the window with his grandmother. And he asked his grandmother, "Can I buy this painting?" And his grandmother allegedly said, "No, I won't have that Victorian junk in my flat." And Andrew Lloyd Webber, who's now one of the great collectors, probably the great collector of Victorian art, missed his chance. The painting was sold by the framer, if you can believe it, to a barber who had a sideline selling pictures. The barber...
She has got great hair.
Well, that's quite right. I love that. I never thought of that. That's very funny. To a barber, and then to a private art dealer, who sold it eventually to a man called Jeremy Moss, who had a gallery in the early 60s, which was one of the first to specialize in Victorian art after the fall of Victorian culture half a century earlier. A collector came into the gallery after Jeremy Moss, by the way, had offered this painting to every museum in the UK and abroad, and everybody turned it down. And one day, a man from Puerto Rico, his name was Luis Ferre, came in and fell in love with the painting on sight. He bought it for £2,000, which sounds like not a lot of money to us today, but it was the highest price paid for a Leighton painting since the artist's death almost 70 years earlier. And that's how the painting is now at the Museo d'Arte de Ponce in Puerto Rico.
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? Because Leighton was so famous during his own lifetime. You know, when you talk about his lying in state here at the Royal Academy, and then there was this enormous funeral procession all the way from the Academy to St. Paul's, where he's buried at the cathedral, you know, where crowds were lining the streets, you know, akin to kind of almost, you know, state funerals.
Absolutely.
And, you know, just to have gone from that level of popularity, but as you say, to represent maybe an old guard in terms of, you know, style and tradition, as opposed to this continental modernism that was pushing across from France especially, but also Germany. But Leighton himself had been, well, he was born in the UK, but he spent much of his childhood in Germany and in France and in Italy, and had rather peripatetic kind of childhood and youth, where his father was a doctor, but they went onto the continent for his mother's health, I believe. And he had a sort of an artistic training that wasn't here at the Royal Academy schools, but that was in Florence, at the Accademia, and in Frankfurt. So he brought with him at the time that he returned to the UK all of these kind of what were kind of, he was, people regarded him rather suspiciously, I believe, as bringing across all these sort of foreign ideas and influences. And so to go from that sort of real leading a kind of Britain in an avant-garde way of thinking, expanding sort of frames of references, to then being kind of pilloried as a sort of rather old-fashioned traditionalist,
relic of the past.
A relic. I mean, it's a remarkable sort of tale of how reputations are so kind of fragile.
It may be the tale of a journey of a painting. I can't think of a painting that's had, in a relatively short amount of time, as many changes in fortunes as Flaming June. I mean, here we are today, suddenly Flaming June is probably the most reproduced Victorian painting, maybe the most famous Victorian painting, which has gone from the framer's window for sale for £50 to being here at the Royal Academy. And I know that the Museo d'Arte de Ponce is delighted that the painting has come full circle in this way, back to the city and, in a way, the building where it began. The museum.
We're delighted to have it. We're thrilled. We're so grateful to the Museo d'Arte de Ponce, and you know, to be able to sort of show it in maybe a slightly different context, because she has travelled extensively, hasn't she?
Yes.
She's been at the Met in New York.
At the Met for a year and a half, and now here. The reason for that is a sad one, in the sense that the museum suffered, well, the city of Ponce, which is on the south coast of Puerto Rico, suffered devastating earthquakes, and which forced a partial closure for the museum. We're rebuilding and reopening soon. However, it also provides the opportunity for masterworks from the collection to be seen in places off of the island, New York, London, and so forth.
So she's got further travels, you think, to go?
She likes to travel.
She does. Well, we love having her here. And as I say, it's kind of a really nice opportunity for us to look at Leighton again, because in our collection we have an extensive number of drawings by Leighton, and as I say, some of these really interesting sort of sketch models that he only started making kind of later in his life. And people often think of him as a painter, which of course he is. That's his sort of main output, if you like. But he made some pretty incredible sculpture as well. And it was great to be able to show our sluggard, which of course is it's also on the theme of sleep. You know, this is an athlete awakening from sleep. Yes. So the sense of, you know, the male figure, the female figure, and these sculptural elements, how Leighton is combining a really profound knowledge of the body and the round, and that sense of the sculpturesque, but translating it also into his painted works in 2 dimensions.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think Leighton is above all a figural artist. Human body, for him, was the top of a pyramid of painting. Yeah. And so for him to be a detailed, sensuous, accomplished figure painter was everything that an artist of his time would have aspired.
He certainly did, and he was very interested in developing the life room here in the RA schools, and he certainly taught students that, you know, they could learn a lot from this sort of reverence and loving look to the past, and to learn what history had to teach them, and to draw from casts of antiquity. You know, we're surrounded in our collections gallery by these sort of symbols, if you like, of that great tradition that Leighton is building upon. He certainly wasn't trying to sort of modernise at the expense of losing that tradition at all. And it's been wonderful to be able to put together a display that looks at that process. He was ultimately this incredibly academic artist that sort of followed this process of drawing from life, drawing from developing a composition, doing drapery studies, the sort of small sketch models he'd often drape in kind of wet pieces of cloth and then sketch from. He said he would then sort of dispose of them because that was the end of their use. But we know that that's not entirely true. Partly because they still exist and we have them in our collection, but also we see how he reuses these in different compositions, such as the Perseus and Andromeda. So it's a really wonderful chance for us to kind of think about that process, that academic tradition, that figurative tradition, and you know, to tell that story across the RA, across our schools, and here in our collections.
And to use these extraordinary collections which you have, which allow visitors to see the painting in context. It's wonderful, in my mind, finally to have Flaming June coming full circle after all these years, and in the context where it started, and among the works that gave birth to it in many ways, which are right here in the galleries around us.
We're thrilled to have Flaming June here and to be able to show her in this context of our collections gallery, which of course is supported by Viking, and you know, who support not just the sort of the fact that we've got this wonderful painting on loan from the Museo de Arte de Ponce, but also of course the wider collection, those Leighton drawings that we're bringing out of the cupboards to show again, but also these copies after Leonardo and Raphael, and of course our Michelangelo Tondo, which are the very core of that artistic debate that so fired the imagination for Leighton, plus his contemporaries and everything that kind of has come since Leighton, including works right up until our contemporaries today. So we're really thrilled, and we hope that Viking viewers watching this may come and explore the collection for themselves, which is here in central London for free. Yeah, the frame is really interesting, isn't it, Patrick? Because, as you said, it sells separately to the painting. It's considered more valuable in some ways than the painting. And yet...
Well, at the time, in 1964.
Exactly. And now we see the work here in the gallery in this gorgeous, resplendent frame, and it's much noted upon, actually, because it is designed by Leighton himself, isn't it?
Yes.
But this isn't the original frame.
No, it's not. It's a replica of the original. In fact, it's called a tabernacle frame, which Leighton used in different variations quite often for his paintings, particularly later on in his career in the 1890s. Originally, you can see what the first frame looked like in a photograph of his studio when Leighton presented his 6, I believe, submissions to the Royal Academy in 1895 in something called Show Sunday. And as I explained, the frame disappeared, the original one, when the framer sold the frame but not the painting. And this frame was able to be reconstructed from that first photo of Leighton's studio in 1895, and now you have this quite beautiful gilt replica. It's wonderful, in my mind, finally to have Flaming June coming full circle after all these years, and in the context where it started, and among the works that gave birth to it in many ways, which are right here in the galleries around us.
Yeah, we're so thrilled, Patrick, to have Flaming June here, and as I said earlier, to sort of put her in context with Michelangelo, that was so sort of core an inspiration to Leighton, but also the many other works that we have in our collection. And you know, as we're talking to Viking viewers, you know, I really want them to feel very welcome, because we're so grateful for their support, to come here to the gallery, which is a free collections gallery, and to just explore all of those riches, both that precede Leighton and Flaming June, his contemporaries, and our contemporaries now. So I'd love to show you around the display and you know, some of those things that we've brought out of our stores to provide the context today for Flaming June. But before I do that, I just wanted to say thank you so much for coming, for lending your expertise, and for helping us along the way to bring this painting back here to London. Patrick, it's been a real pleasure.
Oh, Hannah, thank you so, so much. It's an absolute pleasure to be here.
It's been a pleasure to share our displays and this wonderful painting, Flaming June, with all of the Viking viewers watching. And we really hope and urge you, in fact, that, to come here to visit the Royal Academy. The Collections Gallery is free, and you can see Flaming June until January 2025.